Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet.
Hello and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast. I gotta say, I love that theme. I mean, I've had it for all the podcasts that have to deal with sex. That's how you can separate this one from the relationship podcast. But my executive producer, when he came up with that particular tune for this, I mean, I loved it. It has that bluesy, that rock feel. I like it. Anyhow, thanks, Tate. Thank you for that. Anyway, this podcast is about sex to a man. You know, women ask lots of interesting questions about what's sex like for a man? And, well, I'm going to try to answer some of that. And a question that comes up often, and it happens when women want to know why the guy that they're interested in also wants to have sex with all these other women. I mean, how come I'm not enough for him? Well, that's clearly an individual thing, but guys love to experience things. They're thrill seekers. Just think of it that way. Every woman is different. Now, women, if you're not a thrill seeker, you probably wouldn't understand that. But guys, being with a woman is an experience. It's special. It's unique. Now, women will say, okay, well, it can't be that unique. It can't be that special because he doesn't want to be just with me. No, that's not the way we're looking at it. It's the experience that he's had that is part of the drive. Now, granted, if he had a bad experience with it, do you think he would want to do it again? Probably not. He would probably avoid it like the plague. But what happens? He has a good experience with it, and then he wants to keep on trying things. Now we're not talking about commitment per se. And I know a lot of women, when they start having sex with a guy, then there's the commitment part to it, and that's what they're feeling. If you want that from your guy, you're going to have to be in that conversation. And a lot of guys do commit. They will be monogamous. Let me say it that way. That's when I'm saying commitment. I'm thinking of that relationship example, a monogamous relationship. Because as you know, there are lots of kinds of relationships, polyamorous relationships, and polyamorous means you have more than one lover, and you may have or you love more than one person. You don't have to necessarily have sex with them, but you can love more than one person. And they may also be lovers. So when you think of, say, a woman could have two different partners, they could live in the same home or not. Just the thing about polyamory, and the big distinction is this is not an affair, because in polyamory, your partners know about the status of the relationship. They know about the other person. So it's not like it's a big secret. Okay, so that aside. But going back to the question that women have is about guys. And, I'm not going to get into all the anthropology of procreating and having as many kids as you can have, and where guys want to see. That's a different program, and I may have even talked about that once before in one of the other 230 podcasts that I've done. But this one in particular is just dealing with the raw fact of the feeling that men love sex. They will tell you that, and this isn't about making it right or wrong. It's just the effect of that it has on a man, and he enjoys it, and he likes repeating. He likes doing it over and over. And sometimes with different partners, because they all feel different. And I'm going to use analogies when I talk about this. It's like every car has a different feel. The shape of the seat, the shape of the steering wheel, the shape of the body. Some are a good fit and some aren't. And it's not until you've had that experience that you know what it is. Some people, they have no desire to experiment. But the guys that I know do. And a lot of them have had many partners, some at the same time. And I'm not judging here. I'm just telling you how it is. And they will make a determination based on how the experience comes across, how it feels to them, how it physically feels to be inside that woman, to share that experience, how turned on she gets. Because, guys really are into that. They like to feel that, the woman that they're with at this moment is really turned on and that they're the cause of it. And that really builds a guy's ego, by the way. So for the women that are listening, if you really want to build a guy's ego, then make a lot of noise for him. Just put on a performance. I mean, really. Hopefully you're doing it because you feel it, not because you're just performing. But be uninhibited. That really makes a guy feel special. If you're new at the sex thing, then it might be a little hard to know how to pull that off. And some people go and watch videos, and that example that I use often is, well, at least when I'm talking about where people learn about sex, whether it's in a book, whether it's from somebody who explains the birds and the bees. A lot of people have looked at porn films. And I always say, hey, you got to be careful about that because that's theater. That's something that's created and it's a fantasy. It's not, oftentimes it is not even anything close to realistic. So don't expect that. And I especially say that to the guys because what guys perceive about women, and we say this about pornography, videos, that kind of thing, is because the objection that a lot of people have to these kinds of videos is because of how it seems to degrade women and the perception that guys have about women and how they treat them is it's the foundation of which is in a lot of these porn films, and why they should expect women to be like those bodies in the film. Like I say, it sets up an unrealistic expectation. And the guys that are doing this, they don't look anything like the jocks in the film. And the women say this as, you have an expectation that I need to look like that woman, and you as a guy don't look anything near as good looking or as built as that guy. So there you go. What's good for one is good for the other. But back to the point about guys and loving to experiment with lots of different women. And, at some point, guys do want to settle down. Yes. And sex is a big part of it. I'm not going to say it's the only thing that makes a guy want to settle down, but it's a big part of it. Having a steady lover, having a consistent partner, someone who floats your boat, someone who makes you feel like you, the guy, is all that in a bag of chips. That guys really appreciate feeling like they're king of the hill. Now they feel that way because you help give them an esteem boost. When you're talking about the sex and you're just going on about how good it is, how great they make you feel, guys love that. That makes them want it more. And because every woman, I'm going to tell this to a woman, every woman feels different to a guy. Guys can tell you if they would even talk about this to you, because guys aren't generally going to tell a woman that they've got multiple partners. Now they may talk about other experiences they have, maybe, but if a guy is smart and the woman he's talking to right now, he will not tell her that one of his past relationships is better than you. So guys, do not do that. If you're listening, do not tell the woman you are with now that somebody else was better than her unless you want to get cut off for good. Look, I have to take a break, and I'll be right back after this.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
And we're back. This is John Johnson in the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast. And when I left off at that last segment, I was really making sure that guys understand that you don't tell the person you're with that somebody else was better. You do not do that. That is a dumb thing, because guys, if you do that, you are going to get cut off for good. The point being is that guys have experiences that, and I mean, if you as a woman want to know what a guy thinks, ask him. He'll tell you. Don't assume. Sometimes guys might get a little cagey because they think that maybe if they answer a certain question that they might be setting themselves up for an inquiry. Because something that guys tend to do is sometimes they will get into, now with other guys, they will talk about the sexual conquests. But they got to be careful around the woman, because women tend to compare themselves to the experiences that a guy's talking about. And who am I saying this to? I'm saying this to the guy. So you have to be careful about what you divulge in those moments when you're just talking. Because as you detail that experience to, and let's say the person you were talking to is somebody you're with now. Now, this is not a past tense kind of thing. This is a situation that happens quite often. And especially when people are getting to know each other. Let's say it's before they've had sex and people are just sharing stories about their lovers. And I'm telling you, guys, be careful about how much you're going to share. Because without a doubt, when you are talking about ex-lovers, let's just put it in that context. Let's say these are ex-lovers. Women have the capacity to remember details like you cannot imagine. And sometimes, even in the case of learning your details, they can embellish them a little, because everybody has an imagination, and women have great imaginations. Believe it. But as a guy, you got to be really careful about how much you're going to run your mouth, because you can dig yourself a hole that you can't get out of. And all in the name of just having a conversation. Because I don't know too many women who have had a lot of conversations about their ex-lovers unless they were when they're talking to a guy, talking to the new guy, unless they were sort of illustrating some of the things that they didn't like. I mean, if you're just two friends just talking and you have that friend status and you just share any and everything, yeah, you'll probably get down to some of the nitty-gritty details. But when we're talking about something moving to a potential relationship status, guys don't necessarily want to know that they have to compete against an old lover, or at least the memory of that. And now women will tell you that you don't have to worry about that. That guy's in the past. Or maybe there was some other trait about him that made her want to forget him. Maybe he was a great lover, but he was terrible with money. You can't be with that guy. Well, you know what? The present man doesn't care that he was terrible with money. The present guy cares whether he was a good lover or not. And in your mind, and I'm saying this to the woman, in your mind, am I, the guy that's in your life now, going to have to worry about you fantasizing about that other guy? Yeah, I'm great with money, but was his member bigger than mine, and did that make you feel good? Yeah, it does go there. It always goes there for a guy. They always want to know, are they able to satisfy you? And the conversation for a lot of women goes to, well, it's more the emotional thing. It's not It's not the physical thing. And some will say, well, it's not the size of the boat, but the motion of the ocean. There's lots of expressions out there. You got to get it. You got to figure it out. Have that conversation. So just because she's a woman doesn't mean that she won't have had experiences that really rock her boat. But I think, on average, women do a much better job of keeping those details to themselves. See, guys like to tell stories. They like to tell stories about their conquests, and they like to share those stories. And when they're given a platform to talk, whether it's a man or a woman, guys will start talking. It'll be a long lecture. But guys, you notice women don't do that because they understand how fragile a guy's ego is. And if a woman starts going on a little too long about her ex-lover, she knows that she's going to get the third degree from you. So in order to avoid that experience, she says a little. And just in general, we know guys just love to run their mouths. It's one of the things that when I talk about building, or let's say when you're trying to strike up a conversation with someone, and this comment goes to the guys. When you're trying to strike up a conversation with a woman, the thing that some guys do too much of is they talk about themselves. They talk about themselves. They talk about the sports, and the women are bored to death with that. If you don't know by now not to do that, then you're just going to find out the reason you don't have anybody is because you talk about yourself too much. You don't focus on her. So back to the point. If you learn to focus on the woman, let her talk about herself. Ask questions about her life, her experiences, her education, where she's traveled to, her family, what kinds of things. Those kind of questions are very interesting to a woman. Why? Because the average guy doesn't do that. You could save the sex for the second or third or fourth conversation that you have with her, provided that you find her interesting enough that you want to follow up. And believe me, by the third or fourth conversation, sex will come up. And when you do talk about it, because we figure most people have had a lover or two in their life, when you do talk about it, by virtue of the fact that you've developed a rapport with her by asking lots of questions, she'll probably feel freed up to share. And we've all had our own experiences. She may not embellish a lot. It may become one of those things where you have to ask specific questions in order to get an answer. And you may or may not get an answer, but you can probably glean something from the way the question gets answered as to what might have happened. That's how you find out. That's how you find out. Again, to the guys, this is how you find out about the woman that you're with. Remember, you start out by being interested in her, asking her lots of questions about herself, and let her go on and talk about herself. Some women, that's very easy. Other women actually wait for a guy to begin to ask questions, interesting, probing questions, thoughtful questions. And you'll know you're on the right track when she says, oh, well, nobody's ever asked me that question before. See, what this is going to lead to is you developing a good rapport. And how fast that happens or how slow that happens really, I think, depends on the individuals. But as long as you're interested and you're able to keep her engaged in conversations like that, again, I'm talking to the guys, as long as you're able to keep her engaged in conversations like that, then you have a way of being the person she's going to remember the most. And remember that little insecure critic, the one that was sitting on your shoulder talking about, well, what about that other guy? What do you think about him? See, you can begin to move his memory out and move yours in. This is how women operate. Now, guys tend to keep all of their lovers in their head, and they toss them up. And, when a situation comes around and they see a woman and they say, oh, yeah, I had a girl like her, and, she was this, that, and the other. And now guys talk like this amongst themselves. Now, if guys get careless, they might be a little talk too much and say things that they shouldn't and divulge things that they probably shouldn't, with a new girlfriend or potential girlfriend. And I always caution guys, be careful what you say when you say it. You better be aware of your audience and always check in. I'm going to take a break right now, and I'll be right back after the message.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello, welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast. I'm John, talking to you about sex to a man. Ladies, if you want to find out how sexually intelligent your guy is, ask him a couple of questions. Ask him, where did he learn about sex? Did he learn it in the streets? What did his brother tell him about it? Was it porn movies? Did he learn it in school? And then quiz him. I mean, pick his brain and find out what goes on. Because, if you're talking about sex, you will have his attention. And he will answer your question. And you know why? It's because he thinks that he is now getting himself in a position where he can get some from you. And as long as you're having this sex conversation, he is fully engaged. Now, he may be surprised at some of the questions that you may ask, because this is an approach that a lot of women don't take. Women don't generally ask guys a lot of questions about sex. It's usually the guys initiate the conversation, and then it's sort of a call and response. The guy asks the question, the woman answers. So then the woman kind of hints, well, what about you? And then the guy goes on and he gives some details, and it sort of feeds itself in that direction. But ask some specific questions. Now, there is the thing that we tend to talk about when you're talking about having sex with a new partner. We talk about, sexual history and, are you HIV negative? Have you had blood tests? Those kinds of things. So let me mention that, that is a very important conversation. And that's another way to get into these kinds of conversations. You can begin with it that way. I highly encourage you, have that conversation with the person, your potential partner, so that you know where they stand. I mean, do they have herpes? When do they break out? And on the herpes question, you know what? 80% of the people in the population have herpes. So the fact that they do is the fact that they do. Now, how you manage that situation, there are lots of ways to manage that. Talk to your healthcare professional. You can work around that. So if you're a person who has it and the other person asks you about it, I say, hey, be honest. But it's also an opportunity to educate yourself as to what the concerns should be. But I know some people who are really squeamish when it comes to that question, and you have individuals that can be very condescending around that whole subject. But when you learn what the facts are about how many people in the population actually have herpes, then you can be armed with facts. And that's a real important thing, especially when it comes to something like that. It's very personal. It can be very embarrassing, humiliating when you get the conversation going. But when you realize you're not the only one, then I think it really serves the purpose of being open and being honest with yourself. And if somebody can't handle that conversation, handle being that kind of honest, then that's not a person you want to be with. Now, pivot back to what I was talking about before. Ladies, when you're asking questions, here's a question you want to ask the guy. Why does he want to have sex with you? See, when the guys who, and I got to say this to the guys, like I said, you got to be careful about how much you want to talk about your sexual conquest, because women are paying attention, because they don't just want to be your next score. Women don't like that. I know they don't, because they've told me. Not me personally, because I've done it, but because I have conversations with people, and I want to clarify that. So be careful what you say, because you're going to be held accountable to it, because everything is on record now. But women, ask the guy, why does he want to have sex with you? That's a very direct question, and I'd be interested in hearing an answer to something like that. And ladies, think about it. Why would you want to have sex with that guy? What's in it for you? Think about your answer to yourself. I mean, I'm thinking if it's not going to be spectacular, I don't think I want to have anything to do with it. And you're entitled to say yay or nay based on how you think it's going to go. I'm kind of like, why settle for mediocre? You probably have already had that. I mean, I'm saying that as a guy. A lot of women can cook. A lot of women can clean. And not all women look the same. But I'll tell you what, the big difference when all of these women are going to be that they all make love differently. And that's what's going to stand out. And a woman can say the same thing about a guy. Some guys can swing a hammer. They can wear a tool belt real well. They can fix things. And some guys can't fix anything to put their hands on it. But they have a lot of money. So, a woman, I'm saying this to you. What's going to make you feel better? A guy that's got a lot of money or a guy who can fix things? Let's say both of them make love pretty much the same way. Probably the one that's better at it is going to stand out. And think about this. If there was somebody in your life who, and this is a question you would ask, is there anybody in your experience that you would have a do-over? And why? See, the why part of this is where you find out the nuts and bolts. Because sometimes the why part is because maybe you weren't ready for that person at that point in time. Hey, that's easy. The other why part is maybe you screwed up really bad with that person. And that gives you some inkling as, okay, how much have they grown since that experience? Because that's something else you want to know too. You know, the recency of that. Was it years ago? Or was it more recent? These are the kinds of questions you ask people, and these are the money makers. And by money makers, I mean these are the questions that when you ask, they require some thinking. It's not some canned answer that somebody can make up. And you can't make up somebody else's stories and really answer questions like this. See, these are the ones that I ask when I'm talking to people, because you have to be authentic in answering those kinds of questions. I think we all know somebody who has borrowed stories or embellished stories about things that they've been involved with. And, bragging, that's the, people do that from time to time. But when you ask these kinds of questions to people, you don't get to get away with it. You don't get to get away with telling somebody else's stories or bragging. And then, there's the part about it. If they tell too much, that can be a turnoff. Turnoff because it seems to be a bit much. And you wonder, wow, how am I going to, do I even like this person for having done all of these things? Yeah, people judge. People judge all the time. We ask them not to, but hey, that's not even realistic. It's very human to judge others. I just say be careful about doing that. So let's do a recap. You found out that you're talking about the guy. Now, this is women. You're talking about the guy. He's had many lovers, and nothing wrong with that. We live and learn. We experience life, and we take our experiences with us. You develop enough of a relationship where you can communicate about these things, and I mean bilaterally. He asks you questions, you answer. You ask him questions, he answers. Good thing. Keep it even that way. You find out something about why he's interested in you. And again, vice versa. Guys, if you're listening to this, same thing applies. You want to ask interesting questions. You want to make it more about what she will share. And I do this when it comes to relationships. In talking about keeping it balanced, I share a little bit and ask the other person to share in the same amount. And that keeps it even. That way you're not monopolizing the conversation, talking too much, because that can be a bit of a turnoff. Not just because of the content, but the interest, the technique. The idea here is to have a conversation, which allows the person you're speaking to speak. And I'm talking to the guys because the guys tend to do a lot of talking and talking about themselves and sports. I can tell you, to women, that's a turnoff. I mean, unless they're into that sport, it may be interesting. But again, allow the woman to speak. She will share a lot more in terms of the intimate things about herself if you allow her to go on and expand on what she's talking about, not just the short answers. And I would say, don't just do it to listen for the stuff that you want to hear. Well, let her expand, because there was something that my mother taught me a long time ago. Let people talk, and they will tell you everything about them you want to know. My mom said that, and she was a wise woman. I'm looking at the clock, and I'm going to have to end this podcast right here. I will pick up this subject in another podcast, and we'll talk about a few more things about sex to a man and sex to a woman. But this one was sex to a man. I want to thank you for listening, and I'm John Johnson.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From sex and relationships to health and wellness, life and happiness, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast.